Welcome. Welcome to the Poetry Flash reading series. I'm Joyce Jenkins, Poetry Flash editor and director. Coming to you from Poetry Flash in Berkeley. Tonight, we are very pleased to present a book, Levine. This reading is coaxed at bookshop.org/lists, LISTS/poetry-flash-readings. These two books are beautifully displayed there. You can purchase them. They'll come right to your house. And that link is also in the chat box. You're muted on entry. Please don't unmute yourselves during the reading so that we can hear from our amazing poets. To share, please use the chat box. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Poetry Flash Facebook page and the YouTube channel, Poetry Flash YouTube channel. At the end, after the recording is stopped, we'll keep the Zoom on for a few minutes so that those who have joined us live can ask a question or say hello. Please visit poetryflash.org to see our homage to Al Young, news about upcoming events in California, and much more. To join our email list, please go to poetryflash.org and scroll to join our mailing list. And please keep yourself muted.
Okay. Want to go back on?
While the reading is going on. Dale, hi, Dale Jensen. Want to mute yourself? That would be great. Here's Richard Silberg, Poetry Flash Associate Editor, will introduce today's poets.
Hi everybody. We've got a wonderful reading of two very, very different poets. Julia B. Levine will be our first reader from an extraordinary book called Ordinary Psalms. And the book begins with the detonation that she's going blind, which is an extraordinary beginning, but it's not about that really, or that is happening, but really the book is an extraordinary blending of beauty and compassion against pain. It's not the pain of her, it's not her own pain. It's about all the people in her life. It's about a friend, a best friend who throws himself off a building. It's about the children that she works with as a clinical director of an emergency shelter. It's all about it's really about the beauty of the world. That's what the book seems to me about, an extraordinary writing of beauty and compassion as against these various pains. So an extraordinary book. Let's give her a warm welcome, Julia B. Levine.
So, are you ready for me to start?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Richard, it's so nice to see you, and thank you, as always, for your incredible introductions. I'm going to start just by thanking you and Joyce and Poetry Flash and Mose for having me here to read at Jerry's inaugural launch of his book, which I'm just so excited to hear him read. And thank you to everyone who's here for sticking around for another Zoom reading. You guys are very kind, and it's very impressive of your extreme intellectual curiosity to be here. So kudos to you. I'm going to talk just a little bit about how this book, Ordinary Psalms, came into being. It's got all these little sticky things, just ignore them, but there's the book. And I think the point of these readings is possibly to sell books. So perhaps you're kind enough to buy one. When my eldest daughter was 7, she asked if I believed in God. And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, Mom, in that way a 7-year-old does, Mom, you better hurry up and figure that out. So 30 years passed before I decided to seriously try and answer the question. I just lost, as Richard mentioned, my best friend to suicide. And another friend I was very close to had been given a terminal diagnosis. And on top of all that, my lifelong visual disease had progressed to the point that I could no longer see very well. I was in despair, no surprise, and I decided it was time to read and write my way into some kind of answer to what my daughter called the God thing. I read very religious texts, and at some point I discovered the Book of Psalms. And probably most of you who love poetry know that these prayer songs are very poetic, but they also, maybe because they are poetic, they express at least as much doubt and anger and sorrow about life and God as they do reverence and praise. I was really interested too that given my degenerative eye condition, which had left me with a visual disability, I wanted to understand the spiritual notion of vision as distinct from the purely perceptual sense of sight, or to say it in another way, how did vision help when sight failed? So I'm going to begin with the first poem at the beginning of the book. We're about to switch out of daylight savings time, so here we go. This poem is called Psalm with Wren in Daylight Saving Time. Late afternoon, I chop onions by feel, listening to crows cry to each other across the ridge. Gone now, white recipe card on the white floor, green sea glass found on a Humboldt beach. But this hour I have been given back, carried out of gorse, red flash of maples, finches in our cedar. Meaning today I returned for the first time to the moment I understood I was going blind. Months I hid from myself that the V of geese flying over the valley extinguished too soon into fog, a darkness fine as sugar sifted over the chard, the roses. Now I hear the soft tick of a bird landing on the counter, feel her gaze turn away from mine. When she hops table to chair to floor, I open all the windows and doors. Sometimes we must drag our grief out of the river and put our mouth on it. And then a loosening comes. One morning I rose and sat outside on my lawn under budded glory vines. There is no hurry, I say to the stirrings of one so small it has to be a wren. Once I let the missing in, there was possibility. There was a heavy rain in sun, every blade of grass blurred, and for a moment after, only shine. Thanks for the snaps. So in Jungian psychology, there's this concept of the shadow, and it refers to the largely unconscious attitude we have to our darker nature, our capacity to be hurtful and it means and at times murderous. In the Old and New Testament that I was reading, the shadow is represented by Levine or the devil. In my professional life as a child psychologist, I've heard so many stories of shadow, of our capacity to be cruel to the most innocent people. And so Richard kind of mentioned this, an obsessive theme of mine continues to be why so much horror besides so much beauty. This is one of those poems that's called The Lives of the Saints. I stand at the kitchen sink washing wine glasses. In the 5th century BCE, Heraclitus wrote that the way up is the way down. Like my 5 empty bottles of Merlot in recycle and the depression I'd fallen into before quitting my job, clinical director of the county emergency shelter, which meant talking to children after their father lit them on fire, the foster parents forcing them to eat from a dog bowl on the floor while the biological kids ate at the dinner table. The saints were all about suffering, scourges, crucifixion, drownings. Nothing but death led a saint to give up on intercession. As for me, I'd seen my last 4-point restraint of a preteen with HIV, the last feral kid armed with a blade extracted from the pencil sharpener. Now I look out the kitchen window, remembering this one kid, her hair a dark forest of perfectly matched furs, her angled cheekbones, black eyes. In Catholicism, only an exercise of infallible magisterium makes a saint. Or to paraphrase Heraclitus, the Pope decides if a saint's way down is the way up. For 10 years, that girl was returned to us after every failed placement with a new tattoo or piercing for every John she'd tricked, only to hang herself on her 18th birthday. It was March, vernal equinox, first day of spring. Emancipated minor, they called her at social services, meaning no money, nowhere to go. Did I already say she was extraordinarily beautiful? Before her, I thought beauty was easy to see, something the spirit feasted on while the saints starved themselves on behalf of the afflicted. Now I set the wine glasses on a clean towel to dry, stare at the plum trees that secretly erupted into blossom overnight. I still can't tell you the girl's name, but I'm whispering it to myself. She taught me something true about beauty. It is not just those impossibly perfect stars of petals detonated all at once. It's how you see the rain dark branches when the white lace is gone. The book, Ordinary Psalms, is dedicated to my friend Mary, who died 3 months ago from cancer. When I wrote this poem that I'm going to read, Mary was well into the horrors of cancer treatment, which, as it poisons the body and fails to stop the cancer, includes frequent visits to the ER. There are 2 events I just want to mention in this poem. One is the ritual cleaning we do of our pantry in the fall, because we have a lot of black widows and grain moths in there. And we throw all of it away to either our chickens or our compost pile because they're both these wonderful engines of transformation. And the other event mentioned here is a show I saw where elephants were crossing a river, and there was a calf, a baby calf, that the current was carrying away, and the elephants noticed that the mother couldn't save her, and they all came and made this sort of dam of sorts around the calf so that she could be scooped up to safety. So this poem is called Psalm in the October ER. The argument the body goes on having repeats itself, and the nurses busy with needles and electrodes. Mary tied once more into a gown. Just before she phoned, I was cleaning the pantry, dumping infested flour, rice bubbling with grain moths, black widows scuttling through the shelved and crumbling dark. Now only a thin curtain separates us from the public suffering, a man vomiting, a baby screaming between coughs. I wish I could believe in God's plan instead of science, she says. Later, I will bring Mary warm toast, hold her skeletal frame against mine, dreaming our compost fluttering up as wing spore, a feral cloud. Then wait with her for whatever comes next. Blood work, CT scan, EKG, both of us watching an elephant herd cross a river on the room's TV, the youngest nearly carried away, except first one, then another giant animal hurries to stand deep in the swift running until the calf floats inside the levee of their assembled weight. An hour later, hers or mine, either way, everyone knows how the body ends, how the soul scents the current and wades in, singing to the heart as it drowns. So there's a great paradox intrinsic to aging. If you're lucky enough to be alive in your 60s as I am, you are unlucky enough to feel like an ordinary life is a test regarding how to cope with grief and loss. An ordinary life can feel then like a long elegy that makes every sweet moment all that much sweeter, whether it is a moment in memory or a moment in actual time. So this book began with the loss of my friend Gregory to suicide after he was injured in a skydiving accident that left him in unbearable pain. And this poem that I'm going to read next was written about one of my trips after his death to a place that we both loved. We live right near the Pacific Flyway, and they built these wetlands there, and it's a really amazing place to visit. So this poem is called Visitation. It's separated by little asterisks, but I feel kind of weird like making a sign or something, so I'm just going to pause between sections, okay? Visitation. I thought if he were ever to return, everything since would come rushing up. I thought my blind eye would heal, my arms flung wildly around him, our gladness ferrying us back into those decades we lay in his yard, musing if God were another word for wonder, or if the percentage of water in a body means the soul floats in there like a refugee setting out for shore. Eventually, I'd ask about his suicide, like Mary of Magdala asking Jesus what right he had to take his light from the world. Though today, out walking the wetlands, rain has made the kingdom shine. In the distance, a coyote stares, then disappears. I kneel to a jawbone, lift it from the fine grass, when the slough explodes in a percussive wingbeat of coots lifting up from water, blackbirds slipping under sky. Between worlds, it is said there is no entrance, only entering. So he went in and made me nothing, though even that is no longer true. I can see the wings muddled above me, the troubled blessing of dusk settling down. I know not to move, not to call out his name. I've learned from him that gone is a place followed by quiet. And the coyote on the edge of the marsh is a traveler, his hungers unknotted, his nature given over to a muscular clarity. It's what I most want for Gregory now, to be that close to whatever we meant when we called it holy. Bridget Kelly is one of the poets I absolutely most admire. And I was lucky enough to work with her. And we started a correspondence that lasted for many years. I was so sad when she died. I just think she's just the most amazing poet. But I don't know why we had this conversation about death. And she told me that she did not believe in the disappearance of energy at death. And I think as I go along, I find that somehow to be more and more true, and maybe even comforting in a way. And my first experience with bed bugs contains this idea. So I'm going to read this poem, and the title of which is the Latin name for bed bugs, which, as I'm sure you all know, is Simix lectularius linnaeus. That they came unnoticed, biblical, florid, soft red armies crawling through the breathing meadow of my heat. First, the anesthesia injected imperceptibly, then the venom, hundreds fatting on the host of me while I slept in a rented room, Morro Bay stretching into darkness, brailed up and down my arms, my fingers, like briars tatted to my neck, my shoulders, like sequins stitching my cheekbones, my forehead with thorax, complex eyes, vestigial wings. Afterwards, the itch, the burn, the caustic pox. But I was alive, like everything else, hunger, worshiping where it wants. So when I woke to a strange discomfort, the bay arriving into light, wind in the eucalyptus grove, I knelt beside the bed, searching for mold and stain, and thought of my late friend writing, every day I live forever. And then its corollary, the beauty and desecration paired, the body after death, how it will be taken back and apart and given down to dirt, the seed of stars, how we disappear to grow immense. So the bed bugs were a revelation, a kindness to sleep, so unaware of myself, plundered, fed on, fastened to, as I unfastened my blood, coming as it did from dark, from sun, burnishing their translucent bodies brown. Annie's having a reaction to that. So surprisingly, this project of mine succeeded in helping me know what I do believe about God. So I could actually answer Sophie now, although now I don't think she cares. God for me is both a noun and a verb, a word I use for the larger knowing, for experiences of awe. It involves as much faith as doubt, reverence as rage, grief as joy. Mostly though, God for me is this verb, this process of asking, trying to answer, not giving up on truth, not expecting to know something so much vaster than one small ordinary life can ever be expected to know. And this poem is one of my answers to Sophie about the God thing. It's just called God. You know that hour in winter when the light is a salted gauze and you stop a moment in one of the last untouched fields in this land-locked valley. The new grass arrayed, fat and green, thick as uncombed hair. Then the wild turkeys appear out of the brush in their dark pilgrim plumage and bowed heads and fan out over the field, solitary hunters of seed and grub. This is the moment you need a prayer from your animal self. You need to praise the black mud, the thickened air, the pens of sheep in their black hoods and wool, even the treacherous, untended road that ends at a flooded slough. On your old bicycle with the jerry-rigged baskets and duct tape seat, you pedal hard against a wind that has come up from the southwest carrying rain. Wind that breathes the least branch alive. Wind that brings in the sea. And I'm going to end with a love poem. Emily knows that we both got to study with Marvin Bell, and she knows that he once said every good poem is a love poem. And this one is really about the fact that though this project helped me a lot in terms of understanding what I felt about God, it didn't help me at all with missing my sight. I really miss it. So this poem is called Sea Ranch Song. Vast emerald all day, at dusk the sea turns to ink, the sky a bonfire. Now let it be what it must, though you'll ask why, what did I do? A full moon opens her white coat to the dark matter of it, the all-night breathing of sea, its all-night breaking. You were given a heart like a busted window, and through it arrives the gold of late summer headlands and one black marble salted with constellations. This man too, his rough hands, and a dog the color of honey beside you at the end of a country. Already the shadows throw down their lean graves across the bluffs. Deer rise up from hunger and graze under the swerve of bats, or so the man must tell you. Let blindness enter before you can imagine what will take the place of your dread. Say it will not be desolate. Say that even in this new dark, a sparrow begins its two-note trill to keep count of the whole going out, the whole coming in. Beginning here, you will have to let trust unfold like a softening seed, and not just the man's hands, but whatever you touch, you will have to let your fingers knead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. It makes me wonder about God and where all the beauty fights against all the horror. It's extraordinary, extraordinary book. Okay, our next reader is Gerald Fleming. Jerry, let's call him Jerry. Is that okay, Jerry? I know it is. His new book is The Bastard and the Bishop. And Jerry is a kind of a energizing bunny of creativity. Maybe the most maniacal of his creations to me is a book called One, in which he writes an entire book of prose poems in one-syllable words. Ooh-ha. But this new book, he's taught for 37 years in public school. He wrote 5 books of poetry, books for teachers. He's an astounding bunny. And his new book works off a formula of a friend of a poet named Miller that he cues off and uses these prompts from the poet Miller to write his own poems. And these poems, what astounds me is their narrative power. Where does all these facts and all these sentences, where does it all pour out of? It pours somehow out of Jerry the Bunny. So let's give him a warm welcome. Gerald Fleming.
Oh, Energizer Bunny, huh? I guess I better read fast. Thanks, Richard, as always, and thanks, Joyce. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. I just want to thank Richard and Joyce for what they've done over the last 50 years, I think, right? For the poetry community, not just in the Bay Area, but also much more widely. You've just been jewels for all of us and are keeping us together. I wanted to thank Julia too for reading with me. And Julia, I love your work. We've become dear friends over the last, couple of years or so. And I cherish it. And thanks to everybody who's here. I see a lot of good pals and a lot of wonderful writers and people who are willing to not watch the Giants game or just kind of glance over at it, don't tell the score. This book is dedicated to my friend Bob Hirshon, who was an editor at Hanging Loose for years and years, and one of the prime movers of Hanging Loose Press in Brooklyn and Boston. And Bob died just before the book was published. It was going to be dedicated to him anyway, but it was a rather tragic event for everyone who knew him. And I guess I'll say one more thing. My pal Bruce Henderson made the cover. I don't know if you can really see it, but he did the painting, especially for the cover, The Bastard and the Bishop, and sort of riffed off those words and just did, it's a fantastic cover. I love it. And Richard talked a little bit about the book, the genesis of the book itself, and I would just elaborate a little bit and say that when I was editing the collected poetry and prose of Lawrence Fixell last year, and for the 10 years previous, it came out last year. And David Miller was a friend of Larry Fixell's, and David and I became friends. He's an English prose poet, and he sent me one of his books called Spiritual Letters. And I started reading it, and it irritated me. I immediately did not like it, but I found myself reading it more and more. And the reason it irritated me was that it would run a narrative line for 1 or 2 or 3 sentences, and then jump to a completely different narrative, unrelated, and then maybe back to that narrative, maybe not. And I found in my irritation that it was the kind of irritation where 2 things are rubbing together and sort of make a spark. And some phrases, I would stop in the middle of a page and I would find myself writing from a word of Miller's. In one case, it was the word sisters. In another case, it was the words yearning for an old friend. And so what this book became then was a collection of those. I wrote probably 100 of them, I think, and many were just terrible, but some came out okay, and they're in this book. They're the ones in this book. About a third of them had the original triggering phrase edited out, and I hope it was edited out intelligently. So I'll just read. Let's organize a parade of one-legged war heroes, the president said. 15 years of roadside bombs, there must be thousands of them. We'll dress them in bright colors. The lost lefts will do red. The lost rights will do Air Force blue. We'll fly them here, put them up a few nights, vouchers for drinks. That's all it'll take. They'll march the half step. We'll goose step them left flank and right. And when they're told to close ranks for the cameras, they'll look whole again in the afternoon light, and our nation can forget. Dressed in polished cotton, the soldiers came, did as they were told. Up the straight avenue they marched, young men, young women, slow but lockstep, televised, eyes raised, unwavering, arm in arm for support. And then, as one, they fell. The domino effect come true, but not the way the generals had warned of it, been funded for it so long ago. There on that glorious day, the one-legged warriors fell, men against women, against men, arm in arm, they went down in the clatter of prosthetics, the reds into the blues in one wave undulating down the avenue, the band on the bandstand antheming its martial pageantry of spring, cherry blossoms adrift in the April breeze. What about one-armed men then, said the president. They can still salute, can't they? Let's make them salute. What about gurneys? Can we get guys on gurneys? That was actually written before Trump became president and wanted his martial parade. I think he was running for office, and I sort of wondered about that sort of thing and these crazy military madnesses. This one's called "And the Strangers Do Stay, for They Are Indefatigable." Don't go to strangers on the radio. Just at the moment he was thinking of his dreams, where they'd gone, how faithful he'd been to them, which dreams still to pursue. My time's contracting, and anyway, what did they mean? Then the inevitable deconstruction of each, self-flagellation. Then Etta Jones, bold, assertive on the stereo. Build your dreams to the stars above. Live messages from dead gods. I remember a taxi cab ride at night in a downpour, she said to him once. I thought we were on our way, but a blind man got in, needed a cab, sat beside me. He took my hand and said, don't be afraid. This dream will last only 3 blocks, but if you want, I can stay in your mind forever. And instinctively I said, I want. Chapel. They'd come upon it 30 years ago. You were pregnant. No, don't you think I'd remember if I was pregnant? Certain though, it was the mountains of Peloponnesus. 2-lane main road, hardly main, often single lane, shrines to dead drivers along the way. The place they stopped, that's what stayed with them. A neglected chapel, hardly bigger than a double bed, vaulted arches, the arches not stone, but olive branches embedded in plaster, a window at the end of the nave looking out on the sea, a huge crucifix in front of the window, also olive, gnarled and gray, a Christ figure so desiccated that for a moment they thought one of the local villagers must have willed his body to be lashed to that cross. The chapel was stone on the outside, whitewashed, and the nave whitewashed so thinly that the wood grain of the walls bled through. 6 people and 1 priest would have filled the place. More shrine than chapel, a table in front of the cross, 2 bare wood benches serving as pews. He and his wife were young then and sat together that morning alone. They stayed 20 minutes and no one came, and soon it was apparent the place was claimed by no one, by everyone, was always open, a wayfarer's place to sit, kneel, look at the sea through the tangled cross, pray. They continued down the road, visited a war monument, each still talking of the chapel, the way it echoed their voices almost tentatively, of the contorted Christ, forsaken, almost human. And then he said, let's turn back. We can have dinner at that little town below it. And they did. And they drank ouzo. And though they were in no need of a miracle and did not ask for one, they went back to the chapel and moved the pews and spread their sleeping bags on the stone floor. And all night the cold wind came and went, and the grotesque Christ did not come alive. And halfway through the night, they were cold and zipped their sleeping bags together. He reached for her, and she said, not on your life, Buster, not with that guy looking down at us. And in the morning, they set out, wordless and content, towards Sparta. Let's see. In recall, he'd loved Jung's memories, dreams, reflections as a young man. And if you ask him about it now, he'd probably call it enthrallment. For what returns to him are not Jung's concepts or any particular idea, but a sense that he was being freed, certainly from the Catholic dogma he'd been yoked to for 20 years, but also sent simultaneously by Jung into a synchronicity with the woman he was falling in love with. She was discovering the collective unconscious too, and they were unconscious together, hyper aware of symbolism, uncovering ancient myth and metaphysics for the first time. All of this made more real as they discovered the transformative power of their bodies. Could Jung have wrung so deep a chord without the resonating vessels of their bodies? Could their bodies have felt that holiness, archetypal, without their having studied him? Did they invent those thoughts, that heat, simply because they were young? In fact, they never spoke of it until this year, half a century later, when, still lovers, she said, "Do you remember when we were dating and we were reading Jung?" And then he, "I remember the beauty of your shoulders." This one's called Collector of Titles. There's a reference here to the collected Stevens, the name Stevens. And for people who in the audience who are not poets, it's the poet Wallace Stevens, kind of a famous guy, collector of titles. My friend won't be with us long. He knows that. I know that. And last night when I visited, he wanted to give me books. Even outside the front door, I could smell the cigar smoke in his study. And when I went downstairs, he was in his leather chair as always, the cut glass dish of candy beside him, those orange crescents granuled with sugar. It felt so good to be there. "Here's one," he said. "You'll get a kick out of this. Drink laudanum and live." Someone told me Coleridge read this. And this one, Car Crash Sculpture, a survey of interactive accidental art. Think I'll last long enough to get one of those for my garden, my friend? Maybe my smashed 57 DeSoto? Think there's enough room for it out there? And here, he said, take one more. Blind Certainty in the Darkness. Isn't that just the best damn title you've ever heard? It's about an Antarctic expedition gone wrong. The leader's supposed to be charting the way, but he brings the collected Stevens in his pack and gets obsessed with Stevens the snowman, goes a little nuts, thinks they can navigate by sound, keeps chanting, "For the listener who listens in the snow," in that doleful Stevens voice. This one doesn't end well. Then he laughed, that liquid smoker's laugh of his. And I thanked him and kissed him on the top of the head and took my books and left. That one was triggered by the Miller phrase, "I dream of him lending me books," and it didn't end up in the poem at all, but it triggered that poem. Blue Iris. He considered his life a tiresome journey, a dead secret journey across water from the land of kilos and grams to that of pounds and ounces, then endless travel, odometers and pedometers, every mile logged at day's end, destination to destination, driver, taker of cabs, pedestrian. It was a vow against passion, this obsession, and it took him far over the years. 242,371 miles, the latest entry in his diary. The body, spectacle of accelerating decay, and feelings, what a word, flaccid with imprecision. As far back as he could remember, they came at him. How do you feel about that? What are your feelings on this matter? My God, what cretins. We would expect him to be thin, and yes, he was thin, and his eyes sunken, his hair gone gray, his bookshelves nonfiction and philosophy, his home a plastered semicircle built against the sea. Then the note, "Your poor daughter has died." And his note, "I had no daughter." And the next, "Yes, you did, and you have another." There was a blue iris in the eastern field across the way. He noticed it, looked at it, looked at the note, looked at the note again. That phrase was, "Your poor daughter has died." Lookout. By the river, yearning for an old friend. The cab driver wonders if he's really yearning for an old friend or just yearning for an old friend by a river. Every day, pulls his cab over, gets out, stands at the rail. But this is no rustic shore. It's a kind of violence, collision of concrete and water, velocity and garbage. But still he stays there, mesmerized, the engine of the old Mercedes ticking, diesel smoke drifting his way. The old friend he imagines is no one in particular, a man. I just want to stand here, the driver thinks, in rain or sun, and have him come to me, put his arm on my shoulder and say, What the hell are you doing here looking at this stinking water? Get in the cab and go make some money. Let's meet for a beer later. Every day at a different hour, he comes here like this. Every day to the stinking water. Brocade dress. On the way back from the dance in the days of cars with bench seats, let me start that again. On the way back from the dance in the days of cars with bench seats, you remember those, I think? She slid over to you, put her hand on your thigh, said, "Shall we park?" And she was dark and beautiful. And now, these many years later, you see, she was desperate for you and you for her. And what did you say, Catholic boy? Oh, I'd better get home. In fact was, you could have said, "I'd love to, but I wouldn't know what to do." And now you know that would have been okay. But she would have said, "I'll teach you then." She was kind that way, for she'd been taught and perhaps had taught others. And for her, this was not new. And oh, what a lesson it would have been. 20 years later, you're alone on an elevator in a department store. You're going down and the door opens at a floor before the one you want. And you see in the distance a gold brocade dress draped across an ornate chair. And from hard right, she steps into the elevator and you look at each other and you hear her quick intake of breath as she must have heard yours. And she turns to face the door, and at the ground floor, the door opens and each of you walks away. Winter coat. It was only because you needed that winter coat that the cat, shut inside one of your trunks, was able to live. Of course, the coat was fouled. The cat, a mere suggestion of cat. Your grief that he'd run away now replaced by self-loathing. But you nursed him back. Day by day, he gained weight. The bare patches grew fur. His own winter coat glowed. His eyes regained their focus. And soon he was able to jump from floor to window ledge again. It was then, of course, that he left, and that you began, season after season, to walk the streets in that dry, clean coat, calling his name. I'll read two more. One rather long one. It's called "Shot," and it comes in different pieces, and I'll say the numbers. Shot. A jagged trapezoid of apartment buildings in an old city, 6 stories high. The buildings all stone, the walls of each apartment stone, the floors stone, the little central courtyard cobbled, a few emaciated trees. 4:15 on an August morning, the time of deepest dark, hot night, many windows open, the windows single paned, wooden framed, no breeze ruffling anyone's curtains, the heat, not unusual in this old city, oppressive. No noise from the street, no car nor drunken voice, and a shot rings out. No sound precedes the shot, no sound follows. The shot is not from the street. It is from within an apartment. No single shout before the shot, no prelude of rising anger, no single syllable, no sound after. 1. Many in the complex are awake, unable to sleep, hot summer night, some reprising old mistakes, some luxuriating in erotic scenes, some hearing again their own words they wish they could uninflect, be taken back. 2. A woman, well into her 70s, hears the shot. A few seconds pass and she begins to weep, staring upward into the dark. Her weeping not heavy, almost silent, her breath controlled. Here in this poem, we can be near her, but she would not want us near her. 3. A man on the first floor has lived in this complex 40 years. He is awake, an expert in night sound, the slowly passing cars outside the gate, the echo of wine bottles tossed into the blue bin, the sounds of lovemaking in all their variations. He enjoys that greatly, and it is cruel to him. Drunks fumbling with rings of keys in the courtyard, the artificial mirth of parties gone too late, weariness in the laughter, and the deep silence between 3 and 4:30. The shot occurs into silence, through silence, and the man gets up from his bed, turns on a lamp, goes to a small metal safe bolted onto a bookshelf, spins the dial, opens the safe, picks up a gold ring, looks at it, puts it back in the safe, closes the door. 4. This is a city with a history of wars, and because of what happened in those wars, when people in this city hear a shot near or far, they do not lean out their windows nor call out in question. If they are in bed with someone and they hear a shot and the other person is sleeping, they will not wake her, might not even mention it in the morning, but the shot stays with them. 5. How innocent the air was before the shot, and after, a purple tone, as if bruised. 6. In one of the apartments, a young boy in Batman pajamas half hears the shot, stirs a bit in his sleep, turns over. He dreams of his mother calling him home from the courtyard. 7. And those who hear the shot, insomniac or briefly awake or gliding into sleep and waken, each encounters their moment of denial. A flat cloth-bound book falling to the floor, a door slammed shut by wind, a branch of hardwood snapped, a box tossed through the gate, each image eliminated, then a reckoning, and a tender thought towards self that one could have hoped for such a thing. It is the silence after the shot that unnerves them. In retrospect, they admit they'd hoped for laughter, even, they're ashamed to admit, for sirens, distant, then closing in. And then I'll close with the title poem, if I can find it. Here it is, The Bastard and the Bishop. Okay, I should maybe say what the trigger words on this were: a script, cryptic, enigmatic. The Bastard and the Bishop. Most of the city is underground. That's how hot it's gotten up there. Great descending galleries, complex, reinforced earthen walls. The temperature, a steady 55 degrees. Apartments tiered 4 levels down. The underground river bisecting the city, lit blue or yellow or green to denote neighborhoods, help drunken passengers on the ferry find their way home. Up there, any trees left have been taken by fungus, and no mere rainstorms come anymore, just torrent, unsettled soil, foundations of the shorter buildings shifting, and the taller ones leaning forward, as if peering down, as if expecting to glean some meaning from seeing old couples walking quietly, obdurate in nostalgia, on their above-ground evening passeggiata, the men's hands clasped behind their backs, the women a few paces behind, as if the path they trace, a script cryptic, enigmatic, would one day, by dint of repetition, translate itself into sense, a ratcheting backward into the old dimly remembered dream of verticality, cool stone, temperate breeze. You impute more to buildings than is there, you might say, but I say that it can't be said that buildings have no intelligence. Memories of the old life above ground are fading, so at night they auction stories here, and the rich send their representatives to bid for them. Therefore, the cellars of the rich are lined with stories, some of them my own. I don't mean stories I've invented or read. I mean stories of things that happened to me up there, things I've told out loud. The fist fight with the man slapping the prostitute on the boulevard, the drowned dog eddying in yellow light, the first time I ran for my life. I never had the sense that these were mine exactly. All stories, once told, belong to all of us. But in the buying of them, the storing of them, I do feel that part of me is lost, and in fact, all of us, when we try to tell our auction stories again, stumble on the words, cannot keep the thread. Friends of mine often leave their homes late at night, cross neighborhoods blue to yellow to green, find the fine houses where their stories live, then pace in front of those houses, bright light flaring from windows like hyperbole. It's as if merely being near their stories can coax them back, but I tell them it doesn't work that way. The common ones remain locked in the cellars, the sexy ones in the vaults, and the ones heavy with irony go to the poorly lit libraries. It's my belief that our auction stories speak to each other at night and are changed, exaggerated in a kind of desperation at their captivity. There's a story I want to tell called The Bastard and the Bishop, and it is partly about me. But if I tell it, diaphragm its sad breath into the air, and if one night, many years from now, at a fancy dinner party, you hear a story called 10 Bastards and an Archbishop at 85 degrees, say my theory is right, won't you? And remember me, think of me. I was the first of the former bishop's bastards. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot, Joyce and Richard.
All right, two extraordinary books, two different worlds. Julia B. Levine, Ordinary Psalms, The Bastard and the Bishop, Jerry Fleming. Thank you both for your generosity. Here comes Joyce to sign us off.
Okay. It's like the docking of a spaceship here when we switch chairs. But thank you for that amazing reading. Thank you, and thanks to every single person who logged on to share it with us. And also a reminder, please look at our online bookshop that's set up for us by Moe's Books in Berkeley to purchase these amazing books. bookshop.org/lists/poetry-flash-readings. And it's also in the chat box for those live. So thank you. Thanks. We're going to end the recording now. Thank you.